My name is Nathaniel Brooks. I am 52 years old, and 6 months ago, my wife tried to bury me alive while I was still breathing in a hospital bed. I am not talking about a physical burial, but something far colder and more calculated. The absolute erasure of my existence so she could take everything I built over 3 decades of work. She did not just want my money. She wanted to leave my own children out on the street while sharing my bed with the man who helped me manage my businesses. Imagine waking up after a cardiac episode, your body still numb, and hearing the woman who swore to love you arguing with an attorney about how to forge your signature on a will that declares you legally dead or mentally incapacitated. They heard me breathing, but they assumed my brain was no longer processing. They were wrong. My silence was not absence, it was observation. I lay there, motionless, feeling hatred turn into a cold fuel running through my veins. She looked into my eyes and stroked my forehead with a tenderness that made me sick. While inside her purse, she carried the document that stole my future. She believes she won. She believes I am an old piece of furniture waiting for the end. But today, as I tell this story, she is about to discover that there is nothing more dangerous than a man who has lost everything and has the patience to reclaim it, piece by piece. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave your like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For more than 20 years, I believed I was living the exact definition of success. I started from the bottom, loading boxes in freezing warehouses, saving every dollar until I could buy my first truck, then the second, and eventually a fleet that never stopped moving across the highways. My life was work. I left before the sun rose and returned when my children were already asleep. Everything I did, every contract signed and every sleepless night in front of a spreadsheet had one single purpose: to make sure my family never lacked anything. I wanted my children to have the education I never had, and for Victoria, my wife, to live with the peace of mind that only well-managed money can buy. Victoria was always the gentle face of my world. She handled the house, the social events, and maintained that image of the perfect family that filled me with pride. She was elegant, composed, and always had the right words to calm my strong temper. Back then I saw her as my anchor, the safe harbor I returned to after battling suppliers and unions. I gave her access to everything: bank accounts, properties, legal authority. I trusted her more than my own shadow. We were a unit, or at least that is what I wanted to believe while I drowned in the exhaustion of daily life. My children grew up seeing a provider father, a little distant because of fatigue, but always present when it mattered. My oldest son was finishing his degree and my youngest daughter was beginning to show interest in the business. I was preparing the ground for them to inherit a clean empire, debt-free, a solid structure that would allow them to fly high. Victoria, however, began to change subtly about 3 years ago. She started taking more interest in managing the main office, something that at first seemed excellent to me. I thought she wanted to be closer to me, to understand the weight I carried on my shoulders. It was during that period that I hired Ryan. He was a young, ambitious man with a finance degree and a smile that projected confidence. He became my right-hand man. Ryan knew how to optimize taxes, move capital, and negotiate with banks. Victoria and he spent a great deal of time together reviewing audits and projections. Blinded by workload and the trust I had in both of them, failed to see the signs. I did not notice the glances that lasted a second longer than necessary, nor the business trips that began multiplying to coordinate supposed expansions. In my mind, I was the patriarch, protected by his surroundings. We had a large property, luxury cars, and an impeccable reputation. But the reality was that I was building my own cage. I felt untouchable. At 52, I believed the hardest part was already behind me. I had survived economic crises and aggressive competitors. I never imagined the enemy was not outside, but sharing my table and sleeping in my bed. Comfort made me careless. I started delegating signatures, stopped reviewing bank statements with the precision I once had. I felt tired, a fatigue that went beyond the physical. It was a weariness of the soul that made me want to loosen the reins. Victoria noticed. She sensed the weakness before I admitted it myself. She began suggesting that we should update our wills, that for the sake of the children, everything needed to be legally secured.
"In case something happens to you, Nathaniel," she would say in that soft voice while pouring me a glass of wine at the end of the day. I nodded, moved by her supposed foresight and maternal love. I did not know that on those nights, while I slept deeply, she and Ryan were already drafting the document that would erase me from the map. The atmosphere at home carried an artificial calm, the kind that precedes great storms. Weekends became gatherings where Ryan was always invited. He won my children over, gave them advice, presented himself as the older brother they never had. Watching that harmony filled me with a foolish satisfaction. I felt my legacy was in good hands. My health, which had always been strong, began giving small warnings. Headaches, occasional dizziness. The doctor said it was stress, but now looking back, I remember how Victoria always insisted on giving me my vitamins and blood pressure medication, always from her hand, always with a kiss on the cheek. She was preparing me, softening me for the final blow. My emotional state was one of absolute fulfillment, but it was a fulfillment built on quicksand. I was at the peak of my life, with my children about to take flight and my wife seemingly devoted to our future. It was the perfect stage for a clean execution. No one would suspect the grieving widow or the loyal executive who only sought to protect the family's interests. I was merely an obstacle who had fulfilled his function of generating wealth and now needed to step aside so the true architects of the plan could enjoy the spoils. Everything shattered on a rainy afternoon, the kind that feels like something is about to die. It was not a sudden accident. My body simply gave in under the weight of a strange exhaustion that blurred my vision as I walked down the office stairs. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital room, trapped inside a body that would not respond. I could hear, I could feel the brush of the sheets, but my eyelids felt like lead, and my tongue was a block of wood inside my mouth. It was in that dim half-light, while doctors spoke about a severe cerebrovascular episode, that Victoria's mask fell completely. There were no tears when we were alone. I heard the click of the door locking. I sensed her perfume, that floral scent I had always associated with home, moving closer to my bed. But there was no warm hand holding mine. I heard the rustling of papers, dry and bureaucratic. Then Ryan's voice, low and filled with a confidence that froze my blood. "It's ready," he said. "The notary won't ask questions. The signature is identical to the one we practiced. In this document, Nathaniel declares that in case of any incapacity, you assume full control of the trusts and that, in the event of death, 80% of the fleet shares transfer to you, leaving only crumbs for the kids when they turn 30. I remained motionless, screaming inside, as I felt Victoria sit on the edge of my bed. I noticed her hand running along my arm, not to comfort me, but to check my pulse. "It's for the best, Ryan," she replied with a coldness I had never heard from her before. "He's worked enough. Now it's our turn. The children will be fine. They'll study what I decide and live under my rules. Nathaniel was always too soft with them, too obsessed with legacy." I heard a kiss, a short, wet kiss, the sound of betrayal consummated inches from my inert face. They were planning my civil death while I lay there listening to them divide my trucks, my accounts, and my children's future. The humiliation became complete when, days later, still in that semi-conscious state, they transferred me home under the pretense of a private recovery. They installed me in a bedroom on the first floor, far from my master suite. Victoria came to see me only when the nursing staff was nearby.
As soon as we were alone, her face twisted into an expression of annoyance. I watched her open my safes, take my watches, my personal documents. One afternoon, Ryan walked into the room. He did not bother hiding his contempt. He stood at the foot of my bed, adjusted his tie, one I had given him, and looked at me the way one looks at a wounded animal blocking the road. "Thanks for everything, old man," he whispered with a crooked smile. "Enjoy the rest. I'll take care of Victoria and your company better than you ever could."
The pain was not physical. It was a silent rage, a pressure in my chest that threatened to make me explode. My children came to see me, cried beside me, and I could not tell them that their mother was stripping them of everything. I watched Victoria comfort them with false embraces, telling them that Dad would never be the same again, that they should trust Ryan to save the business from the bankruptcy she herself was causing through phantom transfers. I felt like a ghost in my own house, symbolically expelled from my role as protector, as father, as man. I had been reduced to a breathing inconvenience, a silent witness to my life being looted by the two people I had trusted most. The final expulsion came when I regained minimal mobility. Instead of relief, I saw panic in Victoria's eyes. She did not want a recovering husband, she wanted an invalid or a corpse. That very night, she brought in a different attorney, one I did not recognize, and forced me to press my fingerprint onto documents that were supposedly for medical insurance. I could already move my right hand slightly, but I pretended it was still an uncontrollable spasm. She grabbed my wrist with excessive force, nearly breaking my skin with her nails. "Sign this, Nathaniel. Don't complicate things," she hissed in my ear. In that moment, looking at her through half-open eyes, I understood that the woman I married had died a long time ago, or perhaps had never existed at all. I remained alone in the darkness of that room, while they celebrated with champagne in the living room what they believed was the final nail in my legal coffin. They had stripped me of access to my accounts, changed the locks to my offices, and turned me into a prisoner on my own property. But they made one fatal mistake. They gave me time to think, and in that silence, I began building the fire that would consume them both. My recovery was my first act of war, but I kept it in absolute secrecy. During the following weeks, I continued pretending that my right hand was a useless claw and that my gaze was still lost in emptiness. Victoria and Ryan grew careless. They discussed their financial moves in front of me, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the room. Because of that, I learned exactly which accounts they were draining and in which offshore havens they were trying to hide the fleet's capital. My mind, however, worked with the precision of a watchmaker. Every night, when the house fell silent and they locked themselves in my former bedroom, I practiced millimeter movements. First the fingers, then the wrist, then the entire arm. I needed an ally, someone beyond Ryan's reach. I remembered an old friend from my early days in transportation, a retired attorney named Harold Whitaker, who had always been known for his almost obsessive integrity and his distrust of the new generation of financial operators. One afternoon, taking advantage of the fact that Victoria had gone shopping with the money I had sweated for, and the nurse was distracted in the kitchen, I managed to reach a phone Ryan had carelessly left on the dresser. I did not call the police, I called Harold. My voice was barely a raspy whisper, but it was enough. "They're stealing everything from me, my friend. Come as if you're selling private medical insurance." Harold arrived 2 days later. Victoria let him in without suspicion, assuming it was just another boring social security procedure. When we were alone, there were no embraces, only strategy. I showed him my lucidity was intact. I told him about the forged will and the documents they had forced me to seal with my fingerprint under coercion. Harold, with the calm that only years can provide, explained that we needed irrefutable evidence before they legalized the fake will before a judge. "Nathaniel," he said quietly, "you have to be a perfect actor. Let them move forward. If we stop them now, it's just a marital dispute. If we let them file that fraudulent document in court,
it becomes a criminal offense that will destroy them permanently.
The plan was built on patience. Harold began working from the shadows, tracing the illegal transfers Ryan was making from the company to a mirror account under Victoria's name. Meanwhile, I started using a small hidden camera Harold provided, disguised inside a digital alarm clock that we placed in my room. There, I recorded Ryan mocking my condition, and Victoria admitting in front of him that the will they drafted was a masterpiece of forgery. I heard her say the children would not see a single dollar until she decided, and that they planned to sell the fleet to a shell company owned by Ryan for a fraction of its true value. Every recorded word was a nail in their coffin. My reconstruction was not only physical, it was mental. I began secretly feeding myself better, regaining strength with the meals my children brought me, without knowing they were helping their father sharpen his sword. My oldest son, whom I managed to instruct during a brief moment of privacy, became my eyes inside the office. He believed he was simply updating me out of nostalgia, but in reality he was giving me the access credentials to the servers Ryan had changed. With the help of a cybersecurity expert Harold hired, we remotely entered the company's system. We found draft versions of the fake will, proof of bribes paid to a corrupt notary, and photos of Victoria and Ryan celebrating in luxury hotels with company funds. The revenge would not be an explosion of rage. It would be a surgical process. We allowed them to schedule the hearing for the reading of the preventive will before the judge, a proceeding Victoria requested claiming my total and permanent incapacity. She wanted the official declaration of my civil death so she could liquidate assets and leave the jurisdiction with Ryan beyond my children's reach. I remained in my bed, watching them pack my belongings into cardboard boxes to declutter the house. Seeing Ryan wearing my gold cufflinks and Victoria displaying my mother's jewelry as if she already owned the world only strengthened my resolve. I did not feel hatred, I felt cold satisfaction. I was allowing them to climb to the highest step of their arrogance, so the fall would be final. Harold had everything ready. The testimonies, the recordings, the banking trail, and most importantly, a private forensic medical report proving that my stroke had been aggravated by improper medication doses administered by Victoria. The stage was set. Only the final act remained. On the day of the hearing, the air felt dense, as if fate itself were holding its breath. Victoria dressed me with hypocritical precision. She put me in my best suit, the one I used to close my most important deals, but she did it with the indifference of someone dressing a mannequin. They placed me in a wheelchair, my head slightly tilted and my gaze fixed into emptiness, playing the role of a broken man. Ryan was there, immaculate, acting as the moral support for the poor living widow. The judge, a stern-faced man, began reading the protocol. Victoria presented the fake will with a trembling hand that pretended sorrow, while her attorney explained that, due to my irreversible vegetative state, full administration should fall to her in order to save the jobs and the family estate. It was at that precise moment, just as the judge was about to stamp the seal that would legally erase me from my own life, that Harold walked into the courtroom. He did not enter alone. 2 judicial officers and a state forensic doctor accompanied him. Victoria's attorney tried to protest, claiming it was a private hearing, but Harold placed a yellow envelope on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," he said in a voice that echoed like thunder through the silent courtroom, "before you validate that document, you must review the sworn statement of the rightful owner of this estate." Victoria let out a nervous laugh, a short mockery that died instantly when I, with calculated effort and cinematic slowness, rose to my feet. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood up from the wheelchair with my back straight, feeling the crack of restored bones. I adjusted my suit jacket and walked toward the bench without a trace of the supposed paralysis. The color drained from Victoria's face, shifting from pale white to a corpse-like gray. Ryan beside her took a step back, searching for an exit that did not exist.
I looked directly into their eyes, not with hatred, but with the contempt reserved for an insect before it is crushed. "The will in your hands, Your Honor, is as false as that woman's love," I said in my natural voice, firm and deep. Harold projected the recordings from my bedroom onto the courtroom screens. The sound of Ryan mocking my children and the audio of Victoria planning my disappearance filled the space, bouncing off the walls like lashes. We presented the records of the bank transfers to the mirror accounts and, most devastating of all, the toxicology report proving that Victoria had been administering sedatives to prolong my state of confusion. The trap had not only closed, it had crushed them. Victoria tried to scream, tried to lunge at me with her nails ready to strike, but the officers restrained her before she could get close. Her cries of, "I did it for us," turned into pathetic sobs that moved no one. Ryan, the great strategist, the brilliant executive, was handcuffed on the spot for procedural fraud, forgery of public documents, and attempted homicide by omission. As they escorted him out of the courtroom, I held his gaze. He lowered his head, unable to withstand the presence of the man he believed he had defeated. Victoria looked at me pleadingly, searching my eyes for some trace of the Nathaniel who used to grant her every desire. She found nothing. My stare was a wall of ice. There were no emotional goodbyes, no forgiveness, only the cold execution of a sentence they themselves had written with their ambition. I remained in the courtroom as they were taken away, watching the empire they tried to steal return to my hands. I had not only reclaimed my fleet and my accounts, I had saved my children's future. The irony was exquisite. They had used my own money to pay the attorneys and notaries who ultimately destroyed them. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun hit my face for the first time in months without the shadow of doubt. I watched them step into the patrol car, stripped of their expensive suits and their arrogance. They thought I was the past, but they forgot that a man who built everything from nothing knows exactly how to rebuild himself from the ashes of his traitors. Justice is not a miracle. It is a well-executed calculation, and I have always been an excellent mathematician. Today, my office once again smells like strong coffee and honest work. The fleet of trucks continues running the highways, but now it is my children who oversee the dispatch operations. They learned the hardest lesson of their lives. The enemy does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers sweet words before you fall asleep. There was no reconciliation, and there never will be. Victoria is serving her sentence in a cell where luxury is a distant memory, and Ryan discovered that in prison his talent for numbers means nothing when there is no one left to deceive. They sent letters, of course. She begs for forgiveness, appealing to the years we spent together. He tries to bargain information in exchange for leniency. I have not opened a single envelope. I burned them all in the fireplace of that house, which now feels strangely quiet, but finally clean. Sometimes people ask me if it hurts to have lost the woman I loved for 2 decades. The answer is simple. I did not lose anyone. The woman I loved never existed. She was a projection of my own desire for stability, a character played by an ambitious actress waiting for the curtain to close. What hurts is not the betrayal itself, but the time I wasted protecting the serpent that would eventually bite me. But even that pain is useful. It keeps me alert. It reminds me that trust is a luxury an intelligent man must grant in drops, not in floods. I am no longer the man who entered that hospital room. I am colder, more selective, and above all, far freer. I have cleared my life of parasites and secured my legacy in the hands of those who share my blood and my ethics, not those who merely covet my effort. I do not seek happy endings because life is not a movie. Life is a balance sheet, a series of debts and credits that must eventually be settled. I have already collected what I was owed. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is watching life collect its debts while you sit back with a clear conscience and a glass of whiskey in your hand. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave your like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you are not subscribed yet, activate the bell so you do not miss the next stories.